Welcome to the Red Kelly podcast, and today we're starting a cult in South America.
Yay! Woo!
So my name is Colton, and with me is Jackie.
Hello.
And Moth.
Yo.
So we are members of the CPA, Communist Party of Australia, your favorite Marxist-Leninist party. And we like to talk about Australian things through a Marxist-Leninist lens.
Continuing on the 100-year legacy of the CPA.
Wins all the way down.
So today we're going to be talking briefly about New Australia. So, what's that all about?
Well, you could be charitable and say it's the first experiment of Australian socialism. You could call it yet another racist Australian settler colony. So, I can't call it uniquely Australian, but I can call it quintessentially Australian.
For the time.
I mean, I heard it's still going, and they play like Slim Dusty regularly, so I think it's, still quintessentially Australian.
So it started in September of 1893. Essentially, it was a colony that was split from the Labour Party back of that day. And it was just a bunch of vaguely leftist people, which later turned out to be a little bit less leftist and a little bit less prominent of the time. And they started a colony in Paraguay because after the Civil War conflict in Paraguay, it needed people. It needed to uplift its economy. So it introduced a bunch of white colonizers, believe it or not.
They were hungry for specifically white settlers.
Wait, who was?
Paraguay.
Did they specifically say they were hungry for white settlers?
That's what my source said.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, Wikipedia based.
Those are words you could use.
Yeah, sure. South America's always been hungry for white settlers.
Yeah.
That goes way back.
Yeah, but to give an idea of just how early this is, the Communist Party of Australia didn't exist yet. Wouldn't exist for about 28 more years. The Australian Labour Party was just coming into being, didn't quite exist. There was a lot of debate at the time of how to see what seemed like increasing Chinese immigration at the time, because the White Australia policy was still in effect.
We wouldn't see Aboriginals as human for another 60 years.
Yeah. So the Australian Labour Party formed after a split in the Labour movement. To my knowledge, the Australian Labour Party was the less racist side. If they were willing to accept the Chinese immigrants.
Yeah.
And essentially, this whole colony, utopian socialist colony, as they called themselves, New Australia, was founded by William Lane, who was a journalist, self-proclaimed leftist, who would, little spoiler, come back after 2 years of striking success in the South American jungles, would come back to New Zealand and continue his journalist career for a right-wing party. And so the rules were the following. So there were 6 main sort of biblical points of entry. So first of all, the society was based on a commonhold rather than a commonwealth, which was a kind of a blurry concept. Essentially, the commonhold could be defined as a concept where each member of society should be able to withdraw their portion of a society's wealth if they choose to leave. And I think Comrade Mob didn't really find any evidence of
How that would actually work.
I found one source that was heavily anti-social, heavily anti-communist, so I don't quite know how far to trust it. But to their knowledge, the ones that did leave, and the examples of some that were exiled from the colony, they were basically given a couple of pounds and told to get out. It would get them to the capital city of Paraguay, and then they'd have to beg to the British consulate, please help, I want to go home.
Yeah, so kind of like a teenage camp vibe. Please take me back, Mum. I don't like it here anymore.
Mom, pick me up, I'm scared.
Yeah, exactly that. So the second point was the Brotherhood of English-speaking whites. Now, I don't think I need to explain why that's a problematic statement. Third one is life marriage. I don't know why that's a staple, but it is, apparently, for these guys. Next statement, no less scandalous than the second. Preservation of the colour line. Then there was
Teetotalism.
teetotalism. What's teetotalism?
No alcohol, no drugs. It's prohibition.
Yeah, prohibition before that was widely spread in the US. So before it was mainstream.
So for those intellectually inclined, you would, probably point out that a lot of these aren't really socialist tenets. A lot of these kind of come from the founders, William Lane, and his background. He, during his work in Australia, he was very much part of the Chinese scare and thought that the increase in immigration would disrupt the white Christian bloodline that Australia had. He had anarcho-communist roots, which...
Big surprise?
Yep, which kind of is going to be a thread that kind of runs through the way that this commune was run, and saw socialism as a means to achieve anarcho-communism. And the way that's done is by, implementing what he viewed as the ideal socialist utopia.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of, number 6 is communism.
Yeah.
Is a very brief sort of staple that this is supposed to be a communist commune, although it is very far-fetched, even considering that this is a very idealistic and individualistic tendency.
Yeah, their idea of communism was completely different to
What we know.
Yeah, to our reading of it, because we can look at it through we can look at China today and Vietnam and Laos, DPRK, Cuba, and we could look at the Soviet Union in the past. Back then, well, this is 1893. The Soviet Union didn't exist. All they could look at was the Paris Commune of the 1870s and some people that were trying similar experiments of some small communes around the world. So I can understand the through line between, okay, we've only seen small communes work. Well, Paris Commune wasn't that small. By country standards, of course, yes. Compared to this, it's a completely different level. I could see that the intellectual through line from that to this. They're like, okay, we need to start small and lead by example or something like that. But really what they got was an individualist, escapist experiment.
Which isn't very far from how modern leftists tend to think and operate. When you talk to, a baby leftist just new in the socialist movement, we always have this tendency of, oh man, like having a few beers and just sitting there thinking, we should start a commune.
Yeah.
We should just all pack our bags and do it the correct way.
I think it's a natural thing of when you go through that stage of you're first realizing that things are very wrong and getting a little bit of analysis about why things are wrong and how systemic these difficulties and problems are. It's an understandable reaction to be like, okay, I want out. But it's not sustainable, doesn't help anybody.
It's nihilistic in nature, and if anything, it's sectarianist. So which means splitting ourselves off from the movement and essentially rejecting the base superstructure Marxist-Leninist approach. Escaping from the system does not actually make us isolated from the oppression. We are still on the same level of oppression, we just are that plus different aesthetics and a different sort of cosmetic change and different identity group.
Well, it's kind of a unfortunate reality to kind of start a revolution to change a superstructure is actually participating in said superstructure in the first place, and having your ideas and values become part of the base that actually shapes it. Like, that's the only way how it can happen. Like, this idea of setting up a utopian society and getting enough people to migrate to it, like, it doesn't work.
Also, on like historically colonialist lands, it adds a whole nother layer of like postmodern irony.
And then you are reminded, oh, they preserved the color line, only wanted English-speaking whites. Like, oh man, this is a deeply worrisome experiment.
You wonder how the government of Paraguay started viewing these like fanatics by the end.
How many people ended up like getting on board with this commune?
Well, the first batch was around 230. The first batch was 238. Also, second batch, they ended up around 500 people, and they kept going for a couple of years.
And I think there was a split, right?
Yeah. After a few years, under William Lane's very strong, strong leadership.
Authoritarian.
Oh yeah.
Dictatorship.
Oh yeah.
Because communist.
Dictatorship of the Lane Terror.
Anarcho-communist, yeah.
After a few years of his leadership, some people had enough. So him and I think it was about 80 of his buddies left and founded Cosme, like 72 kilometers south of that.
Yeah, cool. Wasn't the like breaking point is that the second wave of migrants smuggled in rum milk?
Yep.
Is that what a white Russian is?
A white Russian's drinkable. I don't know if rum-laced milk would be.
So yeah, it's a rum-laced milk, which apart from 80 people, the rest of the party seemed to be stoked on.
So that was the part, that was the like the utopian socialist split of the time. So there was, as far as I remember, the rebels and the royalists all split on the question of like substance abuse.
And our sources agree they were called royal. Why the hell were they called royalists?
Why were they called
tangent.
rebels for? Okay.
I get, like, you call your enemies rebels, yeah. Royal? What?
Well, you know, back in the nowadays they call them terrorists, but rebels will do, right?
Rebels got a charm to it.
Yeah. So, did we say everything about? Is there anything else about the commune that was funny? Oh yeah, and it was a really interesting settler experience as well, where they were getting chased around by flora and fauna. It's actually surprising because for many hippie communes of the contemporary day, that's sort of like the breaking point.
Yeah.
But these guys were hardcore. Like they survived like the what was it, like jaguars and stuff like that, actually following them around camp, and you know they actually adapted to it. So like pretty badass for like in comparison to like modern hippies, right?
If you've got a jaguar behind you, I guess you're sharing food, huh?
So yeah, they actually managed to get through that first obstacle to begin with. And 2 years is actually alright. And another thing that we didn't mention was Mary Gilmore.
Right, yeah, she was part of the second wave, yeah.
Yeah, Mary Gilmore is a poet and a socialist writer. She had very kind of a controversial statement of not a controversial, just a mixed statement of essentially saying it wasn't much of a success, but it wasn't a failure, it was an experience.
Like, you get the idea. She didn't quite regret it, but would think twice if asked to do it again.
Well, I mean, it must be the rum.
Yeah, milky rum.
Just White Russian 2. This time it's Caribbean.
So this all sort of brings us to sectarianism and why it's actually not very beneficial to the leftist movement.
Yeah, like this whole thing, like it's a classic example of, I guess, an individual with individual ideas of how society should run and be structured and things like that. And even though, you know, they might have the right theory in terms of economic structure and what a base, what a superstructure should look like, but the moment that you kind of try to employ these ideas from an individualist mindset, like this would be similar to like the results that you would get essentially.
Yeah, and these kinds of experiments can only come from an individualist mindset. When you have a collective mindset, when you see yourself as part of a class, as part of a society,
It's part of the working class struggle.
as part of the working class struggle in particular, you recognize you have certain responsibilities. You have things that just need to be done.
Yeah.
As an individualist,
In an organized fashion.
as an individualist, it's easy to justify running away from any responsibilities or from any kind of struggle to start a new society of like, oh, I think I can do better.
And there's a lot of modern petite bourgeois elements within the youth who are semi-leftist, who either run off and like do drugs and go to doofs and indulge in hippie culture, or like our typical like leftist Reddit user, right?
Yeah.
Who just indulges in the same cult.
Well, people who can like afford to, air quotes, check out and not really participate in a working class struggle, but just coast along, and no, like feeling like things need to change, but you know, they'll be fine if things don't at the end of the day. So
They can ideology shop. They can call themselves a neo-Poseidist Hoshist or whatever they want to, because it doesn't affect them.
It does sort of come back to the crisis of purpose in a modern hyper-individualist Western society where we're all trying to gather an identity, and that ends up being identity shopping for ideology.
I mean, I think often about like, you know, young males being fed the message, like if you're not joining a cause that you're not leading and you're not directly influencing, like what does that mean for you? Like, all right, is that actually successful and things like that? And it's something that like leftists really need to kind of get behind is, look, if you're joining a cause, like there is a line that you're gonna have to toe if any of this is gonna really work.
It's how democratic struggles work.
Yeah.
It's how you get a collective to fight for the same goal.
Yeah.
In Australia, in our Australian context, that means working with unions, that means having a united left front, because we at this stage cannot draw harsh lines between our nuanced leftist perspectives. We do not have a frontier. Much like we're pre-1917. We haven't had a socialist revolution. We're still very much floating around in the bourgeois clouds of ideology.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, that's not helped by, like, I mean, as much as good as its access to information is with the internet and stuff like that, what I think or hypothesize tends to happen is we look for our niche. We look for where we actually fit, you know. Like, I'm a, you know, postmodern Luxembourgist, so I can't really gel with the ML stance or anything like that. So, you know, and with that, yeah, like you can't get that leftist unity that's needed. In the early days of the Australian Communist Party, like a SOCDEM and a Marxist-Leninist, they would have been in the same boat, doing the same thing, attending the same protests under the same banner. But that's not really a reality in this day and age, for better or for worse, I guess.
And okay, it's important to mention that we are not against like individual contributions.
Yeah.
Everyone comes to whatever organization they're in or just whatever position they're in from a different point of view, just a different place as everyone else. So they have something to offer. Individual contributions are incredibly important.
Yeah.
And it is out of a lot of individual contributions in internal debate, in good faith, that we come to a collective agreement.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So essentially, yeah, emphasizing that point, sectarianism must not be confused with principal disagreements and comradely polemics between Marxist-Leninists and between other allies and other leftist parties. And there was an interesting Mao quote that we dug up today in regards to sectarianism, which I'll just read out, and it will be the only boring quotation of this podcast, I promise.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, it's base, so it's fine, right? Sectarian tendencies in internal relations lead to exclusiveness towards comrades inside the party and hinder inner-party unity and solidarity, while sectarian tendencies in external relations lead to exclusiveness towards people outside the party and hinder the party in its task of uniting the whole people. So essentially it's just a summary by someone who has a little bit more authority than our casual day-to-day banter. Alright, yeah, so we're talking about intellectual individualism and elitism. Have we talked about elitism? We haven't talked much about elitism.
I think we're just getting into it. Off of that quote.
Yep, so there is definitely a sort of aspect to us as people who indulge in theory and sit back at home and read a few books and suddenly decide that we're the
brandy in hand and everything.
yeah, us neo-Marxists,
I'll come up with a third way.
Oh no! And I thought the neo is a bit sus. Neo-Marxist, third way, I'm worried.
So yeah, us as neo-Marxists, that's definitely a thing, by the way. It's definitely a thing. Look it up. It's real. The Red Scare is still relevant to this day. We tend to isolate ourselves in groups of people who understand our theory, and it sort of leads to elitism in both language, in terminology, let's say, in ideas, and that actually isolates us from the working class masses and actually isolates us from what's most important for Marxism-Leninism, or at least as important as theory, and that's praxis.
Absolutely. It's probably one of the most tragic ironies of modern day Marxism is that it's a working class movement that's effectively that was made inaccessible to the working class people.
And a great painful thing to see for that is to use an American example. I remember a few years back, the CPUSA, they put out a new poster. I think it was quite a lovely poster. I'm sure this woman like sweeping away capitalists and all that stuff. It was very it made the movement and made the party quite approachable. And I saw so much uproar on it of Twitter because of course it was on Twitter. I saw so much backlash to that, and I've seen similar things that I can't remember quite as well. Of just so much backlash to making these things approachable. It's a gatekeepy elitist kind of approach to Marxism that should not at all be welcome.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think like speaking of Twitter, like I see this happen, this whole idea of the othering people and stuff like that. Like, you know, like there is a class war, and there is, you know, a need to kind of be militant against fascist ideas and stuff like that. But it's a very, very quick thing to kind of vilify those that aren't on board with the cause. And I think that's I think that we should be more generous in that, given the role that propaganda in society has. Like, somebody being ignorant and not knowing better, like, I can't blame them for that, to be completely honest. So, yeah, we can't, like, be anti-ignorance. Anti-ignorance or whatever, yeah.
Anyone's willing to learn.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyone's willing to listen. Please do.
Like, having a conversation saying, hey, I think that you should get paid more for, like, nailing nails, and I think you should get paid more for building this roof. Like, that's not something that's hard to understand or something that everybody would be against. It's, yeah.
The average working class person has a profound understanding of how their rights are violated.
Exactly.
Except the average Australian takes it to the pub and to their friends and just like to their mates and just banter about it afterwards. Whereas we need to indulge in conversations about what can actually be done.
Yeah.
We have an excellent culture of complaining about our issues, but not one of finding solutions and implementing.
I mean, isn't that the whole point of imposing the consumer class on us, though, so that we can have an outlet to do that without...
Yeah, as soon as we take off the uniform, we're a consumer. Those problems are someone else's.
Yeah.
But that is not to say that we should be siding with reactionary movements. We should definitely have our opinion, our staples, because if we are the vanguard, we need to obviously unite workers under our banner, but not to say unite them under something that is delusional.
Yeah.
Yes, and from that, I can deliver our second boring quotation.
Sorry guys, there's actually slightly more than one.
It's a short Lenin one of unity is a great thing and a great slogan. But what the workers' cause needs is the unity of Marxists, not unity between Marxists and opponents and distorters of Marxism. That is to say, anyone willing to listen and that will not oppose and distort Marxism can be made into a Marxist and unified with.
Well, we shouldn't be too optimistic about it either, to be completely honest.
To put that into the scenario of what we're talking about.
Exactly, yes, exactly. Considering it as is a consequence of a larger question, obviously. So, just to wrap all this up, we've just sort of come to the following three main conclusions. And obviously, they are not highly academic, because that's not what we're trying to achieve here. As we've been trying to say, we're trying to not intellectualize Marxist-Leninist theory, because it shouldn't be intellectualized.
Yeah.
It should be things that appeal to people and should be things that are widely accessible.
And by no means am I an intellectual person, so that shouldn't be that.
Yeah.
There is definitely a place for intellectual Marxism, but there's also a great need for approachable Marxism.
Exactly. So we've come to the conclusion that intellectual individualism cannot actually do any systemic change. And it just creates sectarianism within our larger ML movement, really.
It leads to lots of splits in already small groups. It leads to escapism into weird culty things off in Paraguay.
And not only Paraguay, this is a worldwide phenomenon, really. If you look at Reddit and hippie cults around Australia, you'll see a lot of mixed reviews about being assaulted and interesting, violent, culty activities that actually, happen in cults.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what it is. No matter how you advertise yourself as hippie or socialist, utopian, cult is a cult, sadly enough. And another point that we've made, separating ourselves from the class struggle doesn't actually remove us from it.
You may feel like a different person. You may feel like you have a different connection to the world in some kind of a commune or anything, but you're still a worker.
Yeah.
You've just taken yourself out of the struggle so you don't have to fight it. Somebody still has to.
Exactly. And the ruling class is only happy that you've done so.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's counter-revolutionary.
I mean, and not to mention, like, it's an extreme place of privilege for you to even afford to remove yourself from society in any way, like, without being affected by it. So.
Exactly. And that was actually the third point.
Oh.
So you jumped the gun there.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's the average working class person has so much responsibilities on their shoulders to feed themselves and their family. Who can afford to get into a van and or get a ticket to Paraguay and start their own commune? If you look at the history and look at the biographies of most people who indulge in escapist culture, they're petit bourgeois, sadly enough. And what's tragic about it is that it advertises the wrong message to working class people who have this idea that it's possible. And if someone's done it, that means that that it can be recreated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tells them these tiny little projects are something to be looked up to. Or to some people, it tells them these people that have lofty ambitions and goals really are saying all these things so they can get 200 mates and start what will eventually become a cult in Paraguay.
And honestly, even if you look at Paraguay and what ended up happening to it, people that decided to stay all got their own little plot of land, built their own houses. So how is that different to petit bourgeois fantasy in Australia at the end of the day?
I mean, systems are systems, and they'll do their system things no matter, like, your intentions or how you start them. So it's just the way it is.
Eventually, it all turned around and they just went back to being settlers.
Exactly.
Most of them. Like, there's still...
Some went home and were
there's a
settlers
couple-
in Australia.
there's a small group still holding on to this day. Still,
And they feel isolated as well. And
exactly.
so there's kind of no winning there. Also, worth mentioning, though, that there were among the strange neo-Australian settlers, at least one representative that seemed to be pretty base. And that was Mary Gilmore, who stayed for 5 years, taught at a school, and because of her, there is still an Australian flag in one of the schools.
Yeah, you go. Well, I think that about wraps it up for us.
Yep. And that was the Kelly Cast. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.